LiSTNR production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Welcome to The Briefing. When I say transactional, unethical and baby brokers, does your mind go to the world of surrogacy?
Given that in these developing countries there is no regulation, these markets boom in these countries where there's also plenty of young, impoverished women who find the prospect of earning a large lump sum of money to carry a baby for a foreigner from a wealthy country an attractive prospect.
My deep dive with someone who went undercover to investigate this very secretive industry in Australia and overseas is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Wednesday, the 14th of May.
Good morning, Chris, and to you listening. Happy Wednesday. We're starting with a major development. Those who violate international law will be held to account. Those are the strong words coming from Western governments this morning after a United Nations Council found Russia is responsible for the downing of flight MH17 more than a decade ago. Now, the UN Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization yesterday ruled that Moscow brought down the Malaysia Airlines flight over Ukraine on July 17, 2014, which killed all 298 passengers on board, including 38 Australians. That flight was headed to Kuala Lumpur from Amsterdam and was shot down over eastern Ukraine as fighting raged with Russia, with our former PM Tony Abbott saying this at the time.
This is a grim day for our country and it's a grim day for our world. As things stand, this looks less like an accident than a crime. And if so, the perpetrators must be brought to justice.
Now, in a statement issued this morning, the UK government says this sets an important precedent and serves as a reminder of Russia's reckless and dangerous behaviour and its callous disregard for civilian lives.
Yeah, a very similar sentiment shared by our Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who yesterday described the ruling as a historic moment in the pursuit of truth, justice and accountability. And she also urged Russia to face up and make reparations. Now, it was actually Australia alongside the Netherlands who brought this case to the ICAO, that UN Council, back in 2022. Both governments now eager to hear from the Council as to what, if any, reparations it will demand from Russia.
Yeah, and it isn't the first time that this flight has been looked into and the finger pointed at Russia. Back in November 2022, there was some Dutch judges that convicted 2 Russian men and a Ukrainian man of murder for their role in the attack, with Russia labelling it scandalous at the time and continuing to deny any involvement.
Staying overseas and to Paris, where Kim Kardashian's continuing to give evidence today about being robbed at gunpoint at a luxury hotel apartment in the city in 2016. Kardashian was in tears as she told the court about the gunman bursting into her room while she was in bed during Paris Fashion Week and thinking she was going to be raped and shot dead.
And she says that she thought at first that this was some kind of terror attack, not realising that the men were there to steal millions of dollars worth of her jewellery, with one of them shouting, "Ring, ring," and pointing to his finger, supposedly gesturing about her diamond engagement ring. Now, this trial is taking place nearly a decade after the group, nicknamed the Grandpa Robbers, allegedly carried out the heist, with prosecutors saying the men posed as police officers to enter the luxury hotel, threatened hotel concierge at gunpoint, and were then led up to Kardashian's suite in masks before tying her up, taping her mouth, and carrying her to the bathroom while they carried out the robbery.
The suspects, who are mainly in their 60s and 70s, have been on trial since 2016, with 2 of them confessing to date. The trial began Tuesday Paris time and will continue to hear evidence from Kim Kardashian today.
And it's attracted a lot of media attention so far. In fact, there's about 500 reporters that are actually covering this trial from around the world, so we can expect a lot more of updates on this in the days to come.
A groundbreaking global study involving Aussie researchers has found new genes linked to obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, for the first time. More than 50,000 people with OCD and 2 million who don't have it were involved in the worldwide research, which pinpointed a whopping 250 genes linked to the mental health condition. It's the first time a study has been able to find actual genes that play a role in OCD, which has long been thought to be somehow genetic, but not really well understood.
Yeah, and it's hoped that the findings will help transform and really improve the treatment of OCD, which is traditionally a very underfunded research area, and it can help speed up diagnosis and treatment significantly. Now, this is a really exciting medical breakthrough because OCD it's as common as diabetes. The World Health Organization lists it as one of the top 10 disabilities in the world, and I know a few people with it, and it can be incredibly debilitating. But what I also find exciting is that these genes that were mostly found in 3 areas of the brain are also linked to a number of other conditions like anxiety, depression, anorexia, and ADHD. And basically, often people with these conditions, you might see comorbidities in families where sister has OCD, brother has ADHD, or one person has 2. So I'm interested to see if this leads to any other findings around genetics in these other conditions as well.
To the Middle East now, where Donald Trump has received a royal-like welcome, penning a $218 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It's part of a broader $600 billion commitment with the Arab Kingdom's Crown Prince to invest in the United States in exchange for state-of-the-art weaponry. And this was just on day 1 of Donald Trump's 4-day trip to the region, where he is hoping to secure deals worth $1 trillion. This morning, the White House calling that specific defence deal the largest defence cooperation agreement Washington has ever done.
Meantime, celebratory gunfire is ringing out in Syria because Trump's also announced an end to US sanctions on the country that has been in place since at least 2012.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
He says it will give the war-torn nation who overthrew their brutal dictator Bashar al-Assad last year, like you heard, a chance at greatness. Now, while there are several peace talks you would expect Trump to be involved in over the next coming days, there is a clear sense from the administration that this is a trip about historic and ambitious deal-making in the financial sense rather than peacemaking.
Welcome to the rest of the world. Hello and welcome to this year's Eurovision Song Contest, live from Basel.
And my favourite week has officially kicked off with the 69th Eurovision Song Contest now underway in Basel, Switzerland. Semi-final 1 is on as we record these headlines. It started at 5 a.m. this morning for us here down under, with Australia set to open semi-final 2 on Friday morning with WA artist Gojo. Of the 31 artists in both semi-finals, 20 will advance to Sunday morning's grand final.
Yeah, and it's our 10th year competing in the competition, and our local commentary box this year is manned by TV personality Tony Armstrong and global drag superstar Courtney Act, who in 2019 actually had a crack at representing us Aussies in Eurovision.
Yeah, she did. And she ultimately lost to Kate Miller-Heidke, who went on to place 9th in Eurovision that year. I mean, I love it. I love that we have a little shake-up of our commentary box. Usually we see names and hear names like Sam Pang, Miff Warhurst, Joel Creasy. This is the first time that Tony Armstrong and Courtney Act are doing it together. So I'm very excited to hear their commentary. And that is why I need us to finish these headlines right this second so we can get to watching the semi-final.
Okay, Noted. Stopping record, where that brings our headlines to a close so Chris can go and watch Eurovision. Thank you, Chris. Now, next up is your deep dive, speaking to one of our colleagues, actually, who went undercover to look at the secret world of surrogacy.
Imagine trying for a baby for more than 15 years, going through round after round of unsuccessful IVF before spending more than $100,000 on overseas surrogacy, only to get home and be up for possible criminal charges. Well, that's something a Brisbane couple are going through right now. They've been referred to the state's police and prosecutor after admitting to travelling overseas and paying for a surrogate to carry their child back in 2023. While the baby was born in 2024, the same year the couple returned home, their future as a family is now hanging somewhat in the balance because this form of surrogacy, international commercial surrogacy, is illegal in Queensland, as well as the ACT and New South Wales. Claudianna Blanco is LiSTNR's senior investigative journalist who spent months looking into and exposing the very secretive and sometimes dirty world of surrogacy in Australia and overseas for the new Secrets We Keep by Any Means podcast, even going undercover in Latin America as part of the series. Claudes, welcome back to the briefing. These state laws banning international commercial surrogacies have gone unenforced and unpoliced for so long. If these three state governments flicked a switch tomorrow and decided to crack down, what could happen to these kids and families?
Although there have been cases in the past where parents have been referred to authorities because they've been found to be engaging in commercial surrogacy overseas, none of these cases have been prosecuted, which means that if this case were to be prosecuted, it would be an important precedent in Australia. But then the question would remain, and this is the reason why many of these cases haven't been prosecuted. Would the prosecution of these parents be in the best interest of the child? Because you have to consider, punishment is up to 3 years for parents found to have engaged in commercial surrogacy in Queensland. In New South Wales is 2 years plus $110,000 in fines.
Yeah, and I mean, like you mentioned there, that principle of it being in the best interest of the child, that's a family law thing that keeps things uniform in Australia. It's all about putting the child's best interest first. So to your point, very interesting to see how a court would rule on this particular matter. If it is illegal, though, how are Australian people bringing babies into this country, and how do we know that that's happening?
Well, it is happening because there is a conflict between Commonwealth law and state law. So surrogacy in Australia is regulated via state laws. And these state laws say that surrogacy is legal in Australia as long as it's altruistic. So commercial surrogacy is banned across Australia. And in 3 jurisdictions, that being Queensland, New South Wales, and ACT, that ban extends extraterritorially. That means that residents of those 3 jurisdictions can't engage in commercial surrogacy overseas. But the Commonwealth can grant citizenship and issue passports to babies of Australian parents born via surrogacy overseas. And the reason why we know that this is happening is because, you can FOI, DFAT, and get the number of passports that have been issued for children born overseas.
If we take a little bit of a step back, can you explain to us why commercial surrogacy is illegal in every single Australian jurisdiction?
Well, because commercial surrogacy falls under human trafficking laws, because essentially it's the commodification of human tissue at its most basic form. There are other concerns, such as human trafficking risks, of moving people overseas, be it that surrogates or the babies themselves. And so basically, because these risks are so high, that's why it's being deemed illegal.
So altruistic surrogacy is the only legal pathway available to parents in Australia. So that's where the surrogate has their expenses covered only with no other additional payment or personal profit made. What can you tell us about that process? What does that look like?
Well, it's really difficult, bureaucratic, convoluted, long process. And it's not easy because, first off, there's no formal or government entity that looks after this. So people are on their own. And for surrogacy to be altruistic, then the woman has to offer to become a surrogate. So what happens is that they have these private Facebook groups where intended parents can meet surrogate candidates. And basically it's like online dating. They vet each other. They see each other's photos. They have chats to see if their values align, if they feel like they can establish a friendship going forward. And if all goes well, then they decide to meet in real life. You know, we have to consider that in many cases, these are strangers. They don't know each other. In altruistic surrogacy, there's a lot of steps that need to take place. There's a lot of counseling that needs to happen. There's a lot of legal work that needs to happen too. And they also kind of have a lot of deep discussions about expectations and how to manage everything that could go wrong, whatever they can think that can go wrong. And there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah, well, a common one that people think about all the time is what happens if the surrogate grows attached to the child. Are these the sort of conditions that are contracted and discussed in these agreements with the intended parents or IPs?
Yeah, that's one of them.
Wow.
But it goes way beyond that. You know, like there's a lot of complications that may happen in a pregnancy, and you cannot really anticipate what could happen. IPs need to cover all pregnancy-related costs for the surrogate. So that would mean, you know, like if the surrogate develops any kind of health condition or affliction, they need to cover that, lost wages, you know, and there's like things that I never thought about, like beyond the, you know, hypertension or, you know, gestational diabetes. And on top of that, there's all the bureaucracy of having to get the paperwork right. And this takes months to years, tens of thousands of dollars to get everything right. So it's not an easy process. In the meantime, what surrogacy advocates also say is that in this trade, you have like the fertility clinics, you have the medical practitioners, the lawyers, the counselors. Everyone is making money here, except for the one woman who is putting her body and her life on the line to carry.
Which is something that we are going to get to in a little bit. But to wrap that up, altruistic surrogacy doesn't sound simple in the slightest. There is nothing simple about it. And given there's no formal body or procedures people can follow, I understand how we enter a bit of cowboy land here. Which brings me to my next question, international commercial surrogacy, which is even messier. What can you tell us about that?
When IPs seek out commercial or international commercial surrogacy, they're really at the mercy of these international intermediary agencies and baby brokers that control the market overseas. So on one hand, you have the US and Canada, where surrogacy is well regulated, where the ethics are good, but they're hugely expensive. So to have like a baby through surrogacy in the US and Canada can be north of $250,000 of US dollars. So there's these other markets that have proliferated in developing countries where it's far, far cheaper. We're talking about $60,000 US dollars to $100,000 US dollars per baby. And given that in these developing countries, there is no regulation, these markets boom in these countries where there's also plenty of young, impoverished women who find the prospect of earning a large lump sum of money to carry a baby for a foreigner from a wealthy country an attractive prospect to better their lives. That is an incentive for, you know, dodgy operators to proliferate.
And this was a story and a narrative that I listened to as part of your work on the podcast, Secrets We Keep, by any means. You went undercover in Colombia to get a sense of what was going on there. You also joined a surrogacy sisterhood retreat in Tasmania, which was a lot more wholesome. So you kind of got to witness both of these worlds. What was your key takeaway? What was something that really struck you as different between the two? What set these two worlds apart?
Yeah, they were planets, galaxies apart. So the Surrogacy Sisterhood in Tasmania is an annual meetup of women who have experienced surrogacy. This is a group of amazing women who make the extraordinary act of surrogacy seem like ordinary. It was really obvious to me that it was genuinely altruistic. So most of them had their own children, their own families, and they knew they didn't want to have any more children of their own, but they had this very deep need or desire to experience pregnancy again or experience birthing again. And this was a main driver for most of them. When it came to Colombia, this was way more transactional. Even though the surrogates there did tell me that they wanted to give the gift of life, it was pretty obvious to me that their main motivator was the money that they would get. And the main indicator of that is not just the surrogates saying that they want to earn money to better their lives, which is fair enough. No judgment there. But the main indicator of that, to me, is the fact that these women, if they have like a late-term miscarriage or the baby is still born or for whatever reason there is no baby at the end, then they don't get full pay. So what is that? That's paying for a baby.
And it seems like there's no guarantees as much for the surrogates. There's also not many guarantees for these people who are longing to become parents as well, is there?
So basically, we're in a space where the parents are really vulnerable because they have a really, really strong desire to become parents. And a lot of the IPs that I've interviewed in Australia that have gone overseas, they've told me that the law would not deter them because the desire was stronger than the risk. So they're very vulnerable. And then on the other hand, you have these impoverished women who find in surrogacy like the only legal means or the only legitimate means to earn a significant sum of money, which for a wealthy foreigner is not much. But for them, it is significant. But it's nowhere near, the payments are nowhere near what they would need to lift themselves out of poverty. So it's ethically very dubious. And then you have all these intermediary agencies in the middle who are making a cut in every stage of the process of surrogacy.
And these aren't just international intermediaries. There's also some domestically, as I understand, there's some that operate in Australia, which was something I was surprised to discover as part of the podcast. What can you tell us about them, the ones that are operating here back home?
Well, there are a number of seminars and webinars and events and conferences and the like that are being organized for intended parents as educational workshops for intended parents who are seeking commercial surrogacy overseas. But what these events really are is an opportunity to platform or showcase the services of some of these intermediary agencies that operate in several countries.
And to be clear for the record, to go undercover as a journalist, you have to have a good reason that's in the public interest to do so. To be super clear, can you explain to us what that reason was?
When you go undercover, you need to have a good reason to. So this industry is a very secretive industry. It doesn't really want to reveal how it operates. We thought that this was in the public interest because there was a growing number of Australian intended parents heading to Latin America for surrogacy. And we found that there are a number of businesses targeting Australians to do so or helping them to go to South America, where sometimes practices there are very dodgy. In Argentina, several fertility clinics got raided last year, and the authorities claimed that there was an illegitimate surrogacy ring operating in the country. I knew that the only way that we could really understand how these services were being sold to Australians was to, pretend to be.
Yeah, you got yourself a fake husband, didn't you?
I got myself a fake husband.
Yep.
And we posed as an Australian couple looking for a surrogate.
Yeah.
And what I found was a very problematic market where there is a broad range of operators, some more ethical than others, some were downright unethical. And it's an environment of smoke and mirrors where not everything that appears to be cool is actually cool.
Yeah, I know. We laugh, but it's what this podcast revealed and what you discuss on the podcast are some very shocking findings. And I think a lot of our listeners will be really surprised to hear. Claudianna Blanco, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me. And listen too.
That was LiSTNR senior investigative journalist Claudianna Blanco speaking with me there. And like she mentioned, Secrets We Keep by Any Means is out now for you to listen. It is an incredible 6-part series that is definitely worth your time. The link to listen will be in the show notes. That is it for this episode of The Briefing. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget, we'll be back in your feeds this afternoon with another episode. And Tara Cassidy and I will be back in your feeds tomorrow morning for another dose of headlines and an interesting deep dive. I'm Chris Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.
LiSTNR.